Welcome to the Sustaining Creativity Podcast. I'm your host, Mari Reesberg. Over the past several years, I've combined my degrees in acting and somatic psychology to share my sustaining creativity techniques with performers. And now I've decided to share it with a bigger audience that includes you. I believe we are all creative, and this podcast is all about that. I'll be interviewing people from all backgrounds, ages, and creativity experiences to share just how creative we all are. Today, I'll be chatting with John Mendez, host of the Walk to Wealth podcast and founder of Stop and Stare Media. Please enjoy John Mendez. Welcome to the Sustaining Creativity Podcast. Today, I'm here with John Mendez, podcast host of Walk to Wealth podcast and founder of Stop and Stare Media. Welcome to the podcast.
I'm super excited to be here. Thanks again for letting me on. I know we have to go through some obstacles to get here today, but that just means that, God was cooking up a really big, important episode for the both of us to collab on. So the great things take time, right? But we're here today.
That is so true. We needed to marinate, let all of it marinate before we fully showed up for this conversation. So I appreciate that you hung in there and kept coming back. So thank you for that. And yeah, I'm super excited to chat with you and hear what your thoughts on creativity are and how they show up in your life. But before we get there, would you share a little bit with our listeners about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, so you kind of gave me the quick 10,000 foot view. I have a podcast and then I have the Stop and Stare Media thing. But before I was in this world of entrepreneurship, right, and exploring my creativity, I'll take you guys back in a time machine a little bit. So I grew up, it was 9 of us in a 2-bedroom. We grew up in the projects. We had Section 8 housing. We had food stamps. Money was really tight growing up. And I wasn't the entrepreneurial kid. I wasn't selling candy bars at school. I didn't have the paper route. I didn't have the lemonade stand. Like that was not in my nature at all whatsoever. I was like a typical kid. I just played video games and that's about it for the most part. Played some sports growing up in my early childhood at school. But then from there around, fast forward a little bit to college. I was in school and my freshman year, I was having a great old time. I was in a couple fashion shows, a couple clubs. And from there, at the end of my freshman semester, March 2020, pandemic took over the world. So I didn't get to come back for my spring break my freshman year. And during the pandemic, I don't know what happened, but for whatever reason, I found myself ending up going to Barnes and Noble. This is around fall of 2029, my fall semester sophomore year. And I picked up 3 books, and one of them, some people refer to as like the purple Bible, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And so I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and it made me realize that there was another way of viewing the world out there that wasn't being taught in school, wasn't being taught in my environment, but more importantly, wasn't being taught at home. And so from there, I just kind of went down this rabbit hole of entrepreneurship and personal finance, how to build my credit, how to invest in index funds, listening to podcasts, YouTube University, reading as many books as I could. I was just absorbing as much information as possible between that winter break. And so when spring semester started back up, I was like, man, I just learned more in these past like 2 months than I did in like all my years of school combined. With the whole world being uncertain, I think it'll be a good bet to bet on myself. And so that's what I decided to do. So I decided to drop out of college. I signed up for my real estate classes, started working about 70 hours or so. And while studying for my real estate exam, I ended up failing the first 2 times because I didn't study at all. And then the third time I ended up passing it, got licensed 2 weeks after I turned 20. Along the way, I started teaching marketing, and that kind of pivoted to me teaching AI. And along the way, I started my podcast. So the marketing and AI stuff are different from the podcasting stuff, but that's kind of how I got into this world and kind of how I got into what I got going on today.
I love the story. I love the journey. And just like there's so much flexibility, and your ability to see the situation for what it is and make a choice about what works for you, that so many people struggle to do that. So congratulations on recognizing that, mainstream things may not be the best choice, and having the wherewithal or the support or just the faith that
you're going to make a different choice and go with that. I am curious when you decided to drop out of college and
Yeah.
take a very different path. What was that support for that choice like? Was there support? Was there not support? What happened?
Yes, to dive a little bit deeper, right? So during that winter break, I stumbled across a course on real estate wholesaling, and the ad was like, "No money needed, no credit needed." And for any of the listeners that are listening right now, if you don't know what real estate wholesaling is, essentially is, let's say you had a property that you wanted to sell for 100,000. Usually these properties are in a beat up situation, they're usually distressed, or maybe the seller is usually in a bad situation, so they really have to sell quickly, or it's not worth going on the market. So let's say you want to sell for 100,000. I'll find the end buyer that wants to buy it for 110. Buyer buys it for 110. You sell it for 100, right? You sell the property, you get the money. Buyer gets the property. I keep that $10,000 split. In a nutshell, that's kind of what wholesaling is. And so I was like, all right, it was a $500 course. I invested in that. Boom. That was my first self investment, I guess you can say I made, or investment in my self education. And
Mm-hmm.
I got my logo, my domain name. I got my LLC filed with the state. I was ready to get it up and going. Connecticut is an attorney closing state. So I was like, all right, I need some attorneys, right? I need a solid attorney to do my real estate investing stuff. So I started calling up some attorneys on the phone, looked up on Google best attorneys in the area. And then the first four didn't really know what they were talking about. And then like the fifth or sixth guy I talked to, he was like, "Oh, that's that wholesaling thing." And he was like, "Oh, like so many people are making courses on this and you can't do this in Connecticut, yada, yada, yada." Long story short, you can. And I know tons of people now in real estate that do it. But at that point in time, that was the professional. So I was like, all right, screw it. I guess my real estate dream is over. Fast forward a little bit. I said, now spring semester, this is now 2021, my sophomore year. I ended up going out to eat with one of my old friends. And we were out to eat at the restaurant that I used to work out and used to work at. And you ended up going to the bar for a little bit. We were sitting at a table. He ended up going to the bar. You see one of my old counselors from Boys and Girls Club. And they were chopping up for like maybe like 15 minutes. I'm like, yo, where does this guy go? I ended up seeing them at the bar. So I went to go over to join their conversation. And it just so happens he was also interested in real estate. So they were talking and they were about to set up a call with this guy that my old counselor knew that was in commercial real estate, right? So they're like,
Mm-hmm.
John, do you want to hop on a call with them? So I ended up hopping on a call with them. So it was me, my old friend, and then the guy who's in commercial real estate and my counselor. And the guy in the commercial real estate started telling us about real estate. I don't remember anything he talked about, but long story short, at the end of the call, he was like, "You guys need to find a mentor." And I was like, "Well, what idiot would go and look for a mentor when he's literally right here?" So let me just start with him and ask him. If he says no, he says no. If he says yeah, let's do it. Right. So I was like, "Hey, what do you want to be my mentor?" I emailed him and he was like, "Yeah, sure. Why not?" So he ended up kind of mentoring me along the way. In terms of family, there was absolutely no support. Everyone was trying to convince me and tell me what to do. But one of the things I'd love to share is in the hero's journey, for anyone that's familiar with like storytelling, one of the parts of the hero's journey is the atonement of the father. Now, it sounds really philosophical, but all that really means is, at least in my own words, is you can't step into the person you're meant to become until the person you hold in highest regard dies off,
Mm-hmm.
metaphorically, right? Don't
Sure.
kill them.
Yeah.
Metaphorically, they got to die off, right? But their opinions of you and how you should live your life should not outweigh what you view you should live your own life. And
Mm.
so for me, I went into college and I knew that my grandparents didn't have the money to bring me into school, right? So I did everything I can to make sure that they didn't have to worry about a single thing about me going to school. I figured that out myself for the most part. I found the resources, I got the help, no,
Mm-hmm.
not with anyone in my family. So dropping out, I got there on my, well, not on my own. I had people to help me, but it wasn't their help that I got, right?
Right.
So their decision didn't matter to me at all, regardless of
Yeah.
what they thought. And so I made the decision to drop out, and everyone in my family trying to convince me otherwise because I was a golden child, right? I went to church growing up, had great grades. I got into a bunch of colleges, right? I was gonna be everyone, most of my cousins, at least in my like first generation cousin or first cousins,
Mm-hmm.
most of them stayed back in school. Like I was one of the only ones in my family that did well and excelled. And
Mm-hmm.
so they all had this picture of what they thought I should have done with my life. And
Yeah.
for me, the way I see it is like God already blessed you with a life to live, and you chose to live that how you want to live it, right? How you want to live it. So for you to try to live your life through me is extremely selfish in my
Mm.
eyes. So I
Mm-hmm.
was like, I'm gonna live for me because the vision. he put in my eyes, you can't see because he ain't give it to you. Right. So I
Right.
don't need to explain myself. I don't need to justify myself. I don't need to do anything. Right. And I just made the decision on my own, despite the people in my immediate family not supporting my decision at all. But my
Hmm.
best friend, now girlfriend, um, was there along the whole side, and I had other people that supported the decision. So for
Yeah.
me, I could have cared less whether they were with the decision or not.
Nice. Sometimes it's that leap of faith that and trust, and you got to take that jump or take that step and find the support in creative ways.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it sounds like you did, and that's amazing. And when you think about creativity in your own life or just creativity that you experience, what does it mean to you to be creative?
See, what I'm being called to say right now, because I was literally just before I got on here a couple hours ago, I was in a full day workshop because I'm trying to I'm working on landing a TED Talk. And so today we're working on writing out the speech. And
Mm-hmm.
I never actually wrote out a speech before. Or so in my speech, I kind of had the overall ideas of where I wanted to go and the parts. Like they gave me the flow of how the speech to go. And so I had parts for each, but they were kind of pretty much telling me that they kept hearing this recurring theme of like curiosity throughout my entire talk. And for me, I think a lot of my creativity just comes from my curiosity. Like I'm genuinely like a very curious person. And so I'm always open to new ideas. I'm always open to like getting new information. And I feel like that helps sparks a lot of my creativity because most of the ideas I got, I'm also naively optimistic, and I'm also a very quick implementer. So,
Mm-hmm.
like, for one example, I did a virtual summit. It flopped, but that's a story for another day. Long story short, right? I read a book. I think it was like page 6, and like in the book, it was like you should do a virtual summit. And I'm like, okay, I have a podcast. I have tons of people that I know. Boom, close the book, didn't pick it up for like another 3 months. I was doing a virtual summit. And I just kind of ran with it. Right. As I said, it flopped, but that's another story. But it's like things like that. It's like I'm just being open and curious to new ideas. And I think that's what helps spark a lot of my creativity and finding time to be still and just kind of live in that thought space, live in that world, almost escape reality and just
Mm-hmm.
live in those, ideas that generate and flow. I think that's probably how I would define creativity. Not really a simple answer, but I apologize because I guess
No,
if I could
it's
put
great.
creativity in one word, I would say curiosity to pursue new ideas, I guess, or in a
Nice.
couple words.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, I think while yes, we have a definition of creativity, everyone internalizes and has their own experience of creativity, what it means to them, how it shows up in their life. And so every time I ask that question, I get a different, unique answer. And I love all of them because everyone has their own relationship to a creative expression or creative experience. And I was really struck when you were talking about, being curious and having the ability to take risks in ways that many people don't, or many people may experience a little more, they're a little more risk averse. And I'm curious, where do you think your ability to take risk comes from?
I'd say it's a factor of many things. There's definitely um, a lot of different things that play into it, but one of the first things that I think mainstream educational Western society pretty much teaches you is that failing is bad.
Mm,
And that if you fail, you should be punished for that and frowned upon.
mhm.
And so for me, once I got into like this more entrepreneurial space, I started to realize that like there's no losses in life.
Yeah.
It's only lessons. All right, there's
Mm,
no failures. Everything is a lesson. Like so, one of the guys, I got to spend a day with a billionaire, and he was talking about how this concept of like first creation, second creation. It's a very complex topic, but long story short, it's like we all live this life in our head, right?
mhm.
That's our first life, our first creation, and then what we actually live out in the real world is our second creation. And he was talking about how pretty much when you lose, when you win, you win. That's great, but when you
Mhm.
lose, you're growing the spirit. right? And so it's like
Mm,
you're either winning or growing your spirit. So it's like either way. And it's kind of just like reframing how you think about loss and like what it really is at stake here, right? If it's
mhm.
life or death, then I completely understand why some people may be hesitant, right? But
Yeah.
it's like the worst that happen, you'll probably still survive. And so it's
Mm,
like,
mhm.
why not just run with it? Why not go for it? And I'm also naively optimistic. Like I think I did a big five personality test and I ranked in like the tippity top percentile of optimism. Like no matter what you tell me, I genuinely think that there's no negative outcome. And I'm also partially a realist, but like I'm so optimistic, at least when it comes to myself. So it's like, man, you can't tell me that there's something I can't do. That fuels me, if anything. I used to tell
Mhm.
my friends back in the day, middle school, when you used to go to the park and like flip off of like slides and all that stuff, like say I won't. And it's like them saying I won't just help fuel me to get it going. So as I said, there's so many different factors that play into it. But when it comes to risk, I say probably the best thing that helped ground me is that a lot of it comes from my faith, but it's like I know that in the grand scheme of things, that it'll all work out in my favor. Because I
Mm,
believe in someone who doesn't have it out against me, right? I have someone
mhm.
who believe in a higher power that has it is working for me to succeed and not to, have my
Mhm.
downfall. So it's like in the grand scheme of thing, I guess, even like the little hiccups and obstacles along the way, because I'm optimistic doesn't mean nothing bad happens. As I said, my virtual summit flopped, right? Like that was went horribly. Like I still fail a lot, but it's like I know as I said, the big picture, it'll
Yeah.
all work out. And
Mhm.
this guy named Alex Hormozy talks about like the game of life isn't, you don't win at life. The
Yeah.
game is like to last, right? You don't win at marriage, it's to last. So even if I do have a couple hiccups along the way, I know because I'm getting into this more entrepreneurial space at the age that I am,
Mhm.
like most people don't do it until about until like they're usually 2 or 3 times my senior,
Yeah.
right? So it's like worst case scenario, I could literally like just F off and not do anything actually productive for 20, 25 years. And still, by the time I get it, have a little bit of a head start than most people. Right. So
This
it's
is
like
very true. Yeah.
that all play. I said there's a pretty like a lot of variables that play into it, but it's like, man, I guess the naive optimism with the bit of, willingness to put in the hard work with also the um faith and belief that if I stick with it long enough, it'll all work out in my favor, especially when I know I'm doing it with a good heart, with pure intentions. So it's
Mm,
like there's so
yeah.
many things that play into it.
Yeah. Nice. I love it. And I think we need more people like that, like you, in this entrepreneurial space, talking about this and inviting more people to try new things and be optimistic despite past failures or challenges or growing opportunities, and how you can, you know, how the past wants to inform the or how we think it wants to inform the future, but how our present can change our future as well.
Yeah.
So yeah. Now, for someone who, it sounds like is all about grabbing onto new ideas and trying new things, what's your earliest memory of being creative?
That's a great question. Wow. I think the first thing that came to mind was in elementary school. We used to write like haiku poems,
Ah,
and I kind of like poetry. I
uh-huh.
think that's probably like my earliest memory of me expressing any style or form of creativity. I wasn't artsy. That was
Mhm.
never really my thing. I wasn't musically gifted growing up. Once I got older, the poetry kind of evolved into like freestyling and rap a little bit.
Yeah.
But growing up, I think poetry was probably the first time I ever expressed creativity. Now that I'm like trying to reflect on it now,
Mm.
I think I won like a poem like contest in first grade or something like that, or I got featured in something in first grade. I think that's probably like my earliest memory of me expressing any creative
Yeah.
endeavor.
I love it. I love how these things early on in life continue to show up. And it sounds like now wanting to have a TED talk and write speeches, and that the early experience of poetry, I mean, that's part of it. Using your words to inspire others or impart information. So yeah, I really love these connections that I hear when I ask people that question.
I haven't been asked that before. It made me think, but that's the first thought that came to mind. So I'm just running with it.
I love it. Well, I appreciate the first thought. I think it's fantastic. Now, working with, it sounds like you work with a lot of people or talk to a lot of people on your podcast. With your media company and your podcast, talking to a lot of people, working with a lot of people, I imagine you come across people who do not believe that they're creative or couldn't be creative if you paid them. How would you encourage others to find creativity in their life?
So for me, I believe now we're all creative. I don't think there's anyone who's not creative. I think there's just people who had it bottled up and haven't been able to tap back into it. Like, I haven't met a single kid, unless they experience some type of horrific trauma or something like that. But most like regular kids, they all dream, no matter what kid you go to in whatever part of the country.
Yeah.
Assuming, as I said, they haven't experienced something crazy traumatic. They're
Mm-hmm.
all dreamers. Like, they're all visionaries, all of them. Right, the creative side of their brain
Yeah.
is like the only side of their brain that they use. They just live in constant imagination. And so for me, when I talk to people now, a lot of people just for whatever
Yeah.
reason just don't believe that they're creative. Like, if you ask someone, let's say, to create content, especially like with realtors, right? It's like, okay, make a video. Oh, I don't know what to say. Okay, new example. Hey, I want to sell my house. Oh, well, and they just start spitting off stuff. And it's like, you're right. So I don't think it's the fact that people aren't creative. I just think that they don't think they're creative by their own
Yeah.
definition of what creativity may mean to them. I think that's what the big issue is, right? Because as I said, you talk to someone, it's like, hey, do something out of your comfort zone. Okay, can't do it. But do something that you're already good at in a different setting, right? If I put a camera in front of you, told you that I said to talk about selling a house, you might not be able to. But if I put no camera and we're just talking, or if we put no camera and I'm just like, if I told my best friend to randomly cold call a realtor and say, hey, pretend like you want to sell your house and see how long they talk your head off, right? So I think it's more about getting them in the mindset and the frame of mind to realize that they're actually a lot more creative than they really are. And the idea generation stage, like, unless you absolutely know nothing about anything, there's no way that you're not creative. Like, and if you really think about, because a lot of people beat themselves up about creativity because, like, well, someone's done it before. But aside from like the point, like maybe 0.1 percentile of the population that are actual like inventors and create brand new things, right? Most of us are just spitballing some accumulation of all these other thoughts that we gathered from all these other people, just saying it through our own lens. That's the only thing that kind of makes them unique, right? I'm putting air quotes for anyone that's listening and does not see the visuals right now, right? Most of us is just spitting out what other people said or what we heard on a podcast or read in a book or some type of combination of what we heard in all three of the things or whatever, or what a friend told us. So I think it's more about like changing the framework so they realize they're actually a lot more creative than they really
I
are.
love that.
And what they give themselves credit
that
for.
reminder that we are all creative, and how we view what we do has a big impact on us. If we view what we do as being creative, of course we're creative. We're creatively expressing who we are through this form of communication or podcast, or how you do things that bring you joy is creativity. And I love it. Are there things that you do in your life that you do just for you, that you don't share, that bring you joy? What would those things be that help fuel your own creativity?
I'd say one of the things, I guess, that fuels my creativity. Well, I think the shower is like the ultimate breeding ground for like creative exploration. I don't know. I just something about just like playing music in the shower. I just get into like this headspace where it's like thoughts kind of flow to me. Long walks. I don't go on walks often, but every now and then whenever I go on like a walk, I used to walk from back when I worked at the restaurant before I had my car. It used to be a 45-minute walk. And so I would walk home and I just remember just getting so many ideas from just like
Nice.
walking home or just spending time in solitude, right? I think that's when I get
Yeah.
most of my creative thoughts is just solitude. And I think of all these ideas and just random conversations too. I'm that guy that you talk to me, it's like, hey, John, hey, I was thinking about doing this. It's like, perfect. All right, let's go. You can do this, this is how you spin it off. You do this one thing, it boom, boom, boom. And then
Yeah.
that's just kind of how my brain kind of just fires off. Um, but I was told that I should make time block space in my calendar just to create ideas and just like walk. And
Mm.
I think I really should and start journaling. So I'm glad that you asked the question because I think that any person, especially those who would be, I think it's not like are you
Hmm.
creative or not. It's more of like how creative are you. Like those
Hmm.
people who tend to be like extra creative, then I definitely think it's essential to have somewhere to jot it down because I feel like I probably missed out on like at least 1,000 ideas. The amount of ideas I get, it's like I don't jot them down, so I definitely should. So take it for someone who lost out on a ton of different ideas. I mean, I try out a lot of things, but there's so much more that slips through the crack. So I would say something along those lines to help
I
keep the
love it.
ideas, generated and remembered because they're here and then like a couple seconds after
Absolutely.
they're
I
gone
know
because
there are
another
many
idea
people that
came
I've
in.
talked to who keep idea journals and then will look back through them years later. And some of those ideas have come to fruition, others they forgot about and are reminded of again. So, yeah, I'm curious what would happen to your ideas if you wrote them down. That would be amazing to get an update about it. Well, this has been such a treat to chat with you. I just have one last question. What does it feel like in your body to be creative?
Time ceases to exist. I already think time is a man-made construct to me, right? But when I
Mhm.
hop into that state of like ultimate creativity, it definitely ceases to exist. It's like you get in this zone where
Yeah.
everything just flows effortlessly. They in the flow state, right? But just like, man, if I could describe how I feel, it's hard to put the
Mm.
words. It's like otherworldly almost. It's it's very
Mhm.
hard to describe that sensation. And if you try to
Right.
describe it when you're in it, then you just take yourself out of it, right? And like thoughts cease to,
Yeah,
there's no more logical side of the brain. It's just like almost
I
like a
love
full
it.
embodiment of that creative side. And there is no
Yeah,
thought. It just is. And whatever that looks like, but it just kind of is. Hard to kind of put to words,
yeah.
but it doesn't happen all that often. But when it does, like man, I done got some good ideas out of it. And just like, or like the same
Yeah.
thing like in basketball, right? I still play pickup basketball. It's like, good luck. Like, good luck stopping me. Or even when I used to play football back in high school, it's like, you get almost
Yeah.
like future sight. It's like you just
Very
see
cool.
everything
I love it. Well, thank
almost.
you so much for taking the time to chat with me and share your thoughts and ideas. If people want to learn more about the things that you do or listen to your podcast, how could they go about doing that?
And one, thank you for the opportunity. I love the show and like the premise of it, like creativity and just really doubling down on that because we definitely need a lot more people who not are creative because I feel like there are a lot of creative people, but people who are
Yeah.
courageous enough to express it. Right. I think there's a lot of creativity out there that's being kept dormant and kept behind closed doors because we're afraid to express it. So I love what you got going on. And for anyone who is looking to get a little bit more clarity in life, who wants to, build a wealthy, abundant life, and not just wealth in like the monetary sense, but like true wealth where it's like time freedom, location
Mhm.
freedom, financial freedom, the whole health, right? Everything. I would definitely recommend checking out the podcast. You can go check that out at walk the number two wealth.com. Again, that's walk the number two wealth.com. That's where I drop 3 episodes a week. We're on YouTube and all the podcast directory. So I'll definitely go there, check it out. And if you enjoy it, definitely, shoot me a DM and let me know.
Awesome. Well, I'll put that link in our show notes so people have easy access. And thank you again for taking the time to chat with me. I have thoroughly enjoed our conversation.
Likewise, you asked me some good questions I haven't been asked before. So I always love, having to think outside the box and really get put on, having to have like take a back seat for a second to gather my thoughts because definitely asked me some good questions.
Well, I'm glad they they surprised you and made you think about it. So thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Sustaining Creativity Podcast. We'd love to keep in touch, so follow us on Facebook and Instagram. We are at Sustaining Creativity. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. Tag your friends and family so they can listen too. We love to hear from you, so leave your reviews, comments, and questions. Check out our website, sustainingcreativity.com, for upcoming offerings and creativity coaching. Tune in Tuesdays for our next episode. And remember, with creativity, anything's possible.